very honoured and privileged to have Briony Llewellyn speaking to us tonight. She's a very old friend. I first met her working on the legendary collection of Rodney Seawright, which is now in the Victorian Albert Museum, which is a priceless resource for anybody interested in the Middle East. Views of the Middle East collected by a man who had worked for British Petroleum. And Briony has published a lot and written a lot on these incredible artists who travel around the Middle East, recording people and places and often events. And she's just told me there's going to be an exhibition about Schranz in Malta in 2018. Put it in your diaries. Schranz was a great recorder of the Ottoman Empire. And tonight she's going to talk to us about another artist in the Ottoman Empire who links places and power and art in a particular way and at particular years. I think it's 1792 to 4.
A bit earlier than that.
Or earlier than that. And this is Luigi Mayer, a man probably of Swiss-Italian origin, who worked for the British ambassador, Sir Robert Ainslie, and travelled throughout the Ottoman Empire. Thank you very much, Briony, for speaking to us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Philip, and it's my pleasure to be talking to you tonight, and great privilege, so thank you very much for asking me. Now, I have no idea if any of you have come across Luigi Mayer before, but I've got some nice images to show you, some of which come from the British Museum, the V&A, and a private collection. Sir Robert Ainslie, who was Britain's ambassador in Constantinople, do say if you can't hear me at the back, there's rather a lot of traffic noise outside, but put your hand up if you can't hear me. British ambassador in Constantinople between 1776 and 1794 was, according to the St James's Chronicle in 1790, and I quote, strongly attached to the manners of the people. On his arrival, Sir Robert, in his house, his garden, and his table, assumed the style and fashion of a Mussulman of rank. In fine, he lived en Turk, and pleased the natives so much by this seeming policy, which was no other than the gratification of his own inclinations, that he became more popular than any of the Christian ministers. So, as Britain's representative in the capital of the Ottoman Empire, Ainslie's brief was to further his country's political and commercial interests in the region. Adopting an Ottoman way of life was unlikely to have been part of his official duties, but if it was a calculated strategy to help forge diplomatic links between Britain and Turkey, it succeeded, at least for a while. Strangely, at a time when many British travellers to the Levant had themselves portrayed in Ottoman costume, Ainslie apparently did not choose to do so. Instead, he made a far more wide-ranging statement of his Levantine interests by employing an artist to make an extensive record, not just of his own activities during his tenure of office, but also of the people and the landscape of the empire. This artist was an Italian, Luigi Mayer, whose prodigious output of work eventually comprised the most comprehensive survey of the Ottoman Empire produced in Britain in the later 18th and early 19th century. And it was only replaced in the 1840s by David Roberts' hugely successful series of lithographs, the Holy Land, Egypt and Nubia, etc., which I'm sure many of you will know. So the means through which Mayer's images reached a wide variety, a wide audience in the early 19th century were as acquaintance. And these were published in a series of volumes known collectively as Views in Egypt, Palestine and Other Parts of the Ottoman Empire. These were published between 1801 and 1804. And a bit later, Views in the Ottoman Dominions, published in 1810. And I just show you a selection of 4 of the acquaintance from these books. Some of you may have come across some of these. They're fairly widely available in booksellers, and of course in major libraries. But these prints are a very pale reflection of the original watercolours by Mayer from which they were made. And they're reduced in size and often conventionalised. I show you an example here of the watercolour and the aquatint. And the sort of more quirky aspects of Mayer's compositions are sort of toned down in the aquatints. And they're sort of prettified, and as you can see here, the little dog, the tree, and it's lacking this rather dramatic silhouetted figure, which gives such drama to this watercolour. And of course, quite a lot of the watercolours weren't actually even published at all, and a very large group in the British Museum, several of which were not published. So I'd like to share with you my enthusiasm for Mayer's watercolours, which are of Sicily, Turkey, Palestine, Syria and Egypt. And I'd like to argue that the freshness of Mayer's approach to his unfamiliar subjects and the vigour with which he handles them reveals an original mind and a talent more considerable than has so far been recognised. Since the known details of Mayer's life are in frustratingly short supply, our prime source of information about him is, of course, his work. Even his dealings with his two most important patrons, the Principe di Biscari in Sicily and Sir Robert Ainslie, are hardly documented at all. I'm tonight going to focus on the work that Mayer did for Ainslie in the late 1780s and early 1790s. So I'm going to have to skate over the few available facts that we do have of his early life. He seems to have received his artistic training in Rome. He's recorded as attending a course at the Accademia di San Luca in 1771, but that's literally all the documentation we have. And sometimes he proudly signed his work, as you can see here, Luigi Mayer Romano, fake it. Or, and you probably can't see that quite so well, Disegnato e dipinto da Luigi Mayer Romano. So he seems to be putting abroad the idea that he came from Rome, certainly trained in Rome. He was said to have been a pupil of Giovanni Battista Piranesi, but there's no evidence of this, no evidence of a formal association with him. But clearly, he was working in the same mould as these Italian vedutisti artists, as they were called, of whom, of course, Piranesi was the most famous and the finest. And I think you can see here in the two images that I've shown together, Mayer's frontispiece to one of his books and Piranesi's frontispiece to the Vedute di Roma, how much he relied on Piranesi for his compositions and the way in which he approached his subjects. And here too, I've just put up two comparisons, the top two and the bottom two, Mayer on the left, Piranesi on the right, to show the kind of images that Mayer would have lent on and drawn influence from the great master Piranesi. So from the early 1770s, Mayer was in the service of the Sicilian scholar and collector of antiquities, the Principe di Biscari in Catania. And probably he remained there until the prince's death in 1786. How and when Mayer came to the notice of Sir Robert Ainslie is another of the missing pieces in the jigsaw of Mayer's life. We've got very fragmentary bits of evidence, and unfortunately the key link between Ainslie and Mayer we just don't know about. It does seem possible that the link between them may have been the numismatist Domenico Sestini, who acted as an agent for both Biscari and Ainslie, and he could possibly have recommended Mayer to Ainslie. But again, this is just speculation. In the 18th and early 19th century, it was, of course, common practice for ambassadors and wealthy travellers to hire artists to accompany them abroad in order to make visual records of significant events and historic monuments. In an age before photography, drawings and watercolours functioned as important markers of authority or achievement. So Mayer's proven ability to depict dramatic events like the eruption of Mount Etna, as you see here, or antiquities such as the Greek temple at Segesta, could have been enough to secure him the position of Ainslie's draftsman. Just like to point out here this rather interesting detail which you get in a lot of Mayer's images of the travellers surveying the monuments and what looks like possibly the artist seated there with his drawing board. And he does appear in quite a lot of the images. The one that I showed you at the beginning of Ephesus, you could see that he was the artist drawing in the corner. So Mayer then worked for the ambassador in Constantinople until 1794, accompanying his patron to England the year after he was recalled. He would have been working in a private rather than an official capacity, which would explain the scarcity of references to him in the official dispatches between Ainslie and British ministers in England. But despite this, Mayer's value must have been recognised. For when in 1798 Thomas Bruce, 7th Earl of Elgin, was appointed ambassador to the Ottoman port in Constantinople, he sought advice from Ainslie on the terms of employment for an artist he wished to hire as his draftsman. Ainslie informed him that he had paid his artist 50 guineas a year with board and travelling expenses. And he said, it was clearly understood that the whole of his works, drawings, pictures and sketches, were to remain with me as being my sole property. Some of you may know that the artist whom Elgin eventually hired was Lucieri, and there was a magnificent exhibition in Edinburgh fairly recently. Poor old Mayer's waiting to have an exhibition, but I hope one day we'll be able to manage that. Ainslie was by no means the first diplomat in Constantinople to engage an artist to record the events of his office. And indeed, as Philip Mansell has noted, the city inspired an unusual number of so-called embassy pictures. Ainslie's French opposite number and rival for influence at the court, the Comte de Choiseul-Gouffier, also employed two artists, Jean-Baptiste Hilaire and Louis-François Cassas. So while the two ambassadors jockeyed for position, promoting the interests of their respective countries, these artists, although they were employed in a private capacity, produced images that played their part in the tangled web of political intrigue. So here we've got two very different conceptions of the theatre of Myra in Turkey, modern Demre. One by Cassas, working for Choiseul-Gouffier, and the other by Mayer, working for Ainslie. And you could hardly believe that they're the same place, and it's only really the lines of the theatre that indicate that they are. Cassas has really romanticised it and put all this foliage and rushing water, which just simply isn't there. So now let's look at some of Mayer's diplomatic images. The Italian inscription beneath this watercolour translates as internal view of the pavilion of the Grand Vizier, where he received European ministers on the occasion of the audience of His Excellency Sir Robert Ainslie, His Britannic Majesty's ambassador to the Ottoman port on the 19th of March 1788. So here we have a visual document that commemorates a specific event, and this is the elaborate ceremonials accompanying the meeting between the Ottoman Grand Vizier and the British ambassador on that date. And so in the centre, beneath this wonderful green-roofed pavilion or tent, and we've got these drapes of crimson silk, you've got the Grand Vizier seated on these red cushions, surrounded by the ministers of state, his interpreter, and army officers, all in their red robes. Behind them, I think you can just see there's a wonderfully impressive array of weaponry. In the right foreground are the executioners with their two-headed battle axes. On the left side of the scene is the British delegation, with Ainslie himself in Western ceremonial dress, seated on a low stool in front of the Grand Vizier. There he is. He's accompanied by his own interpreter, his secretary, and numerous court attendants, among whom, in the left foreground, is a figure wearing a coat of a slightly different colour red and with gold-trimmed pockets. And as you can see, he's turning round to face us, and I think that this must be Luigi Mayer himself. The location is the large encampment established at Davut Pasha, 10 miles west of Constantinople, by Kodja Yusuf Pasha, the Sultan Abdul Hamid I's hawkish Grand Vizier. And this was where his troops gathered before marching to Austria. Encouraged by Ainslie, acting on behalf of the British government, the Ottoman Empire had declared war on the Habsburgs and Russia in August 1787. And on the same day, Mayer depicted the encampment from the outside. And the translation is external view of the pavilion of the Grand Vizier in the field of Daoud Pasha, near Constantinople, on the day of the audience of His Excellency Sir Robert Ainslie, Ambassador of His Britannic Majesty at the Ottoman port on the 19th of March 1788. So as well as the line of large green canopies, so there wasn't just this one, there was a whole array of them, we see behind numerous smaller military tents, and in the foreground the rows of Turkish foot soldiers, and to the left cannons and some of the cavalry. So it is in essence a display of the might of the Ottoman army gathering before their march westwards. The final flourish is Luigi Mayer's statement, bottom right, disegnato e dipinto da Luigi Mayer Romano. So we're in no doubt who's created this and who it's for. So both these two images underline this important role that Ainslie had played in the event. And Mayer is recording it for Ainslie and for posterity in great style. A couple of weeks later, Mayer records a naval event connected with the same war. This is view of the Yali Köşkü outside the walls of the Seraglio, where the Kaptan Pasha receives the fur cloak from the Grand Seigneur before his departure for the Black Sea on the 5th of April, 1788. So, before departing with his fleet for the campaign against the Russians in the Black Sea, the Turkish Grand Admiral, Cezayirli Hasan Pasha, receives the customary honour of the fur cloak, symbolising that as the Sultan's proxy, he has assumed the imperial mantle for the ensuing conflict. The Admiral, or Kaptan Pasha, bows low before entering the kiosk to meet the Sultan, who will afterwards pass through the guard of honour to his waiting barge on the left. This display of the Sultan's power and magnificence is witnessed by vast numbers of Ottoman subjects on both land and water. As you can see here, lots of veiled women, a lot of people in boats, a whole mass of spectators. The 16th century Yali Köşkü, one of several waterfront pavilions formerly at the entrance to the Golden Horn, was built by Selim I for just such reception. And above it on the hillside, of course, the walls of Topkapi Saray make an imposing backdrop to this imperial ceremony. So once more, Mayer has adroitly recorded an event of Ottoman history in which his patron, Ainslie, had played a significant diplomatic role. Now, these three that I've just shown you are from a series of 10 sheets painted in watercolour and gouache, and almost a metre in width, so they're very large. And they and a further 48 smaller watercolours were shipped back to England on board the Pearl in 1789 and presented by Ainslie to George III. So this gift does seem to have been a deliberate self-advertisement in order to bring Ainslie's diplomatic achievements to the notice of the king. As well as documented these grand state occasions, Mayer painted several more of the larger sheets with views of the Bosphorus, recording for Ainslie the rural charm and magnificent scenery of the fabled waterway in the late 18th century. These follow a well-established formula of foreground figures in colourful local costume on a high vantage point, from which both sides of the straits can be seen. But Mayer's views stand out from many others like this for his enormous skill in handling the sweeping vistas and which take full advantage of the picturesque indented shoreline. In this one, the view is to the north. The vantage point is the hill above Kandili, with its wooden mansions on the Asian shore, from which the two fortresses, left and right, are seen. Here we are, Rumeli Hisari and the Anadolu Hisari. And just beside the Anadolu Hisari, of course, is the area that was known then to Europeans as the sweet waters of Asia, which became a popular resort for the fashionable elite of Ottoman and European society. As well as these wide-angled panoramas, Mayer was adept at recording everyday life on the shores of the Bosphorus. And this charming scene of Greek and Turkish men and women at leisure demonstrates the mingling of races, creeds, and genders typical of late 18th century Constantinople. It's titled View of the Landing Stage at Çubuklu now, in Asia, and the Canal of Constantinople looking towards the Black Sea. Çubuklu, on the Asian shore, was known for its market gardens. The flat landing place provided a convenient spot for women from the many Greek settlements on this side of the famous waterway to dance and to make music. I think you'll agree it's a delightful tableau from this line of Greek women colourfully dressed dancing to the Muslim veiled ladies here, who have presumably come here in their Araba, and right on the shoreline, a European riding by on his horse, and some more Greek dancing. In the left, the Chesme women drawing water. So Mayer and Ainslie's interest in rural life extended beyond the city, particularly to the Belgrade forest. And this was a favourite retreat for European residents of the city in the hot summer months. The area was famed for its reservoirs, seen here from one of the villages. Now these reservoirs survive, but the substantial wooden mansions that once stood in the village of, I can't pronounce this, I'm afraid, Komerçu do not. These were not often depicted by European artists. And here they're part of a charmingly bucolic scene in which Mayer captures Ottoman rural life with characteristic freshness and humour. these children here, I think, fishing for frogs. There's another similar watercolour which actually is inscribed that they're fishing for frogs. And then here's another unusual scene. The Italian inscription translates as the space between the palace and the garden of the gentleman ambassador of England in Pera, Constantinople. So I hope you're beginning to see how quirky some of Mayer's compositions are, and this is very typical. And we get a glimpse of the ambassador's domestic life, highlighting the below-stairs activities behind his official duties. In the foreground, you've got two servants beating clouds of dust out of a large carpet, and behind them, three more members of the household here, engaging in a more leisurely conversation. And though these were more informal than the diplomatic images that Mayer made for Ainslie, I believe that such scenes also had a purpose in visually underlining for the British ambassador's contemporaries and successors the familiarity with Ottoman life for which he was noted, and which distinguished him from many of his fellow Europeans. Now, of course, I could linger with many more of Mayer's images of Constantinople and its surroundings, but I'm going to move on, as I'd like just to touch on another dimension to his work, his views of places in the further reaches of the Ottoman Empire. Like the images of events and places in and around Constantinople, these were made with a particular raison d'etre. Ainslie had strong antiquarian interests, but he was duty-bound by his office to remain in Istanbul. As he was unable himself to explore the numerous archaeological remains in Turkey and beyond, he employed agents, notably Domenico Sestini, to collect coins, medals, and antiquities for him. When three young travellers arrived in Constantinople, needing an artist to accompany them on their journey to Syria and Egypt, Ainslie gave Mayer a temporary release from his service. So, Mayer, with these three travellers, who were, the names were George Graves, Charles Berners, and Henry Tilson, left the city on the 1st of February 1792 and sailed down the west coast of Turkey. They called at Rhodes and Cyprus and then continued on to Egypt, voyaging up the Nile as far as Cairo. From Alexandria, they sailed to Jaffa and made a trip inland to Jerusalem. They then sailed along the Syrian littoral to the south coast of Turkey, visiting the area they called Kakamo, and nowadays it's modern Kakova, which is nowadays so much visited for its remarkable Lycian remains, but then, of course, was hardly known at all to Westerners. Continuing on, they explored Cnidus and Bodrum and berthed at Samos, from where Mayer returned to Constantinople in June. It was a very extensive journey, and the scenes of ancient monuments, of landscapes, and of the local population that Mayer collected are a remarkable survey of Ottoman lands and their people several years before these images of these places became widely available to the West in the wake of the Napoleon invasion of Egypt. Mayer's focus on the landscape and life of the towns and villages, as much as on the imposing ruins, suggests that he was not restricted by his patron's antiquarian interests, but that he was free to follow his own inclinations in his choice of subject. He treats the local inhabitants with candour and a strong sense of their humanity. And this is very unusual because at the time, foreign people were more often depicted as exotic stereotypes. So this approach, coupled with these, as in this one, apparently drawing on 18th century theatrical traditions. Again, we've got no knowledge of any kind of link that Mayer may have had with the theatre, but it does seem to make sense. And these do set Mayer's watercolours apart from the many more conventional Grand Tour watercolours, with their emphasis on scenery and antique ruins. Some of his views do, of course, conform to the traditions of the picturesque, but his choice of colour and perspective is more often very startling and idiosyncratic. In addition, he does seem deliberately to highlight the encounter between East and West that he and his party represented, and he frequently shows the English tourists meeting local inhabitants. I've just taken some details from some of his works, a lot of which, as I say, do include Europeans being pointed out, the ruins, and rather more informally dressed in this one, some of whom will be Mayer and his companions. While he was living in Constantinople, Mayer would, of course, have been part of the cosmopolitan Levantine community living in Pera. At some stage, and again we don't know when, he married Clara Barthold, who was probably a relative of Thomas Barthold, who was a dragoman employed at the British Embassy. Now, she too was an artist, probably taught by her husband. Since the watercolours she signs as both Clara Barthold and Clara Mayer are so obviously based on Luigi's compositions. This one here, it's Clara Barthold, I think. And here, I just show you the comparison between one of her works up here and the watercolour of Tarabya on which it's based. And there's her signature, Clara Barthold. So you can see how reliant on her husband's work she is. And, you know, a perfectly passable artist, but not of the same standing that he was. When Ainslie was recalled from Constantinople in 1793, he travelled home overland. And the following year, Mayer and Clara accompanied their patron on his journey through the Moldo-Wallachian principalities. And here he is, with his massive entourage, winding their way through this valley. Near what seems to be Velika Pisanica, now in Croatia. I must thank Charles for digging this bit of information out for me. And unusually, a lot of Mayer's on-the-spot drawings from this trip survive. I just show you one of them that's in the V&A. So this would have been the original sketch that he would have made while he was travelling, and this then the watercolour that he worked up once he got back to England. And it's very unusual that we have his original watercolours, and so original sketches. So this and another very large group in a private collection are a wonderful survival. And then I just show you one of the watercolours that were worked up from his sketches from this journey through what is now Romania and Bulgaria. They are a remarkable record of a remote area of Eastern Europe that was very little known to the West. Earlier in the 18th century, Lady Mary Wortley Montagu's famous letters had brought some awareness of the region to Western audiences, but visual representations of these lands were very scarce. So, arriving in England with Ainslie, the Mayers settled there. But it seems that they didn't receive much support from their former patron. He seems to have rather left them in the lurch. So instead, Luigi went to work for the Berners family, making views of their estates in Suffolk. And he may have been employed as a drawing master to other members of the landed gentry. And perhaps that's why he looks so rather grim-faced in this portrait, published just after his death in 1803. Clara actually then remained in London. She must have been a very plucky lady, drawing and publishing her views of Constantinople in her husband's style. So I'm afraid I've overrun a bit, but I'm just going to leave you with this wonderful curiosity. It's a list of works by him and a display of the variety of monuments, ruins, landscapes and figures that Mayer had encountered on his travels. Clearly, it's an advertisement for the wide range of his subjects and talents. Prominent in the right foreground is a figure in Western dress with a drawing board, who, again, is probably our friend Luigi himself. And it could serve as Mayer's manifesto. It's a summation of the considerable achievements of this under-known 18th century draftsman. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Briony. That wonderful tour de force of our view of the Ottoman Empire in the 1790s. And clearly there must be an exhibition of Mayer in London and travelling to some of the places he painted. And no one could do it better than Briony. Let's hope it happens through sponsorship. I'm sure many people have ideas.
That's what we need.
And now, I'm just going to make, maybe there's some questions. Yes?
Could you say a little, in terms of his impact, you refer to the publications in the first decade of the 19th century, but say in the middle of the 19th century, were there what you might call popular editions? I mean, would educated members of the middle class have seen these, or were they in immensely expensive things in libraries of the gentry or universities and places like that?
I think they were quite popular and quite widely known. But of course, by the 1840s, you've got the lithographs coming in. So these sorts of things go completely out of fashion. So by the time you've got the 1840s with Roberts, and even a bit earlier, they're just not regarded anymore. But I think until then, they were immensely popular, and there do seem to be quite a lot of the books published. I don't think that they were tremendously expensive.
No, they weren't. They had such a big run, the individual price of the volumes wasn't that high. And there must have been a lot, because they're still available. You can go to many printers and buy individual plates.
Yep.
You can even buy the books, sometimes for enough money.
Yeah.
Even I owned some, and they were given to me. So that's how, how freely available they were.
Yeah. Except that one that has the portrait of him as a frontispiece. That's a very rare one.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it must have been published just when he died.
But there were several editions.
There were several editions, yes.
Between
1801 to 10.
1801 to 18.
And then there were the smaller popular editions, I think, in the 1830s.
There's even one done for Sunday schools, wasn't
Yes,
there?
exactly. Yeah.
One can only hope that he benefited financially himself rather than...
No, I don't think he did. I think that's the whole point. That's why he had to become a drawing master. I think Ainslie just dumped him. That's... and again, we've no idea why.
Sonia?
I expect you know that the Romanians are really keen on him because of so few people having gone through the Romanian principalities.
Yes.
And there were various articles by Trevor Hope and other people in the journals in the 1970s and 80s.
Yes.
And there was actually a very small exhibition at the V&A I went to 20 or 25 years ago now, which concentrated on his Romanian drawings, so I don't know if you've come across that.
I don't remember
That's
that.
a small one in the...
I was certainly...
It's right at the back of the V&A, near the back entrance.
I was in correspondence with Trevor Hope.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, at the time.
Right.
But no, I don't remember an exhibition.
No, I don't. I was in
I
Britain.
think there may have been a catalogue which I can look up and see if I've got it at home. It's very small.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Yes, no, the Romanian... In fact, I was just reading in the train on the way here an article written by a Romanian girl, and they're very keen on him.
And there was a very small one at the Imperial Museum about 5 years ago, which...
That was really the Clara Mayer. They've got a group of that. I showed you one of them. About six or seven. They've got one by Luigi, and the rest are Clara's.
Oh, right.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, while we prepare for the next talk, I want to make a few announcements. If anybody wants to buy an article by Briony on Luigi Mayer. You can buy copies of Cornucopia for £10. Brian has very kindly agreed to take the money. And please subscribe to Cornucopia, a wonderful magazine about Turkey and countries linked to Turkey.